I'm going to talk to you about dominance in dogs, and I wanted to tell you a little about myself first. Before that, I wanted to thank you again to Ruby because of the idea of this marathon. I think it's a wonderful idea. And well, I am a biologist. I did my mastership thesis in zoology and animal ecology, and I am currently working on my PhD thesis that is going to be about dog social behavior here in Havana. So I hope I'll be studying free ranging dogs in the city. I also teach at the biology faculty. I teach the course of animal behavior and welfare, and I am also a dog trainer. I learned about dog training with Alexa Capra and the Gentle team, and I am very happy that I learned with her because I think it's a wonderful method to provide welfare to dogs. And that is exactly my goal as a professional, to provide welfare. So before I can start talking about dominance, I know I have to make a statement because I know that the term is a very complicated subject in force free training nowadays. And I wanted to make clear that I don't use or promote the use of any kind of aversive tools on dogs of any breed for managing, training, or rehabilitating any kind of dogs. I think it's very harmful to use aversive. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about dominant theory, but no, I'm not going to tell you that you should alpha roll your dog. It's not healthy, it's harmful. Please don't do it. It's also dangerous. Please don't do it. I know I had to make the statement because I know that us for free trainers usually think as dominance as evil, and I understand why. I mean, in traditional training, dominance has been used as an excuse for abusing dogs for a long time. And the idea of this talk came about when Alexa and I were discussing about dominance in a force free trainers group, and some for street trainers told us that we shouldn't talk about this term because it would mean that we were inviting people to abuse their dogs. That was the risk of talking about this term. And I understand what they say, why they say it, but I also think that we should learn about dominance and talk about dominance because it's a scientific term that has a lot of valuable information, and if you diffuse the information correctly, then we will able to provide a better welfare to our dogs by learning about dominance. And it's not what traditional trainers tell us is a very different and complex phenomenon. So if you go to the event where we were publicity in this talk, then you will see that I shared a few posts where with information about dominance. There was this talk about dominance in chimp from Franz de Waals. He talks about how complex dominance may be. He talks about it as a communication phenomenon and not necessarily linked to aggression. And that's a vision that I would like to share also in dogs later. But you can see also that there has been dominance has been studied in fishes, for example, salmons, and in invertebrates like the paper wasp. Those are just examples. But what I want to say is that dominance is a very widespread phenomenon in nature. It's a way of organizing societies. So any species that lives in groups has some kind of rankings in the group. We are not all equals. We there can be egalitarian interactions, but it's very rare. What you will see most is a form of social organization that is usually involves some kind of ranking. And in this regard, I wanted to share with you another example that was published by Walter Clyde Alley. He was an ecologist that talked about social behavior at the beginning of the 90s. He talked mostly about cooperation and altruism, but he also talked about social organization. And in his book, The Social Behavior of Animals, he makes a chapter about group organization, and he mentions an example of babies. So they took 5 babies with an identical genetics. They were quintuplets, and they put these 5 sisters. They were all females. They would put these 5 sisters together, and they would observe their behavior as a group. And even in this case, where genetics of all individuals were identical, you could see a slight difference in their personalities because of the slightly different environments that they would be living in even before they were born. So in the womb and after birth, they were living not in the exact environment. They were facing maybe different persons that would take care of them, different temperatures. The environment around them would not be exactly the same. And this slight difference in environment would provide them with different personalities. And what Clay says is that once you have these different personalities, then you could put them in a group and you can see a ranking. So it's not necessarily linked to aggression, like I said before, but you can see a ranking, and it's nothing bad about it. It's not something that you should get rid of. It's not something that you have to teach. It's something that is completely natural in the communication and interaction of social species. And in the case of dogs, you see that if you put the dogs in the right context, that is a context when he can express himself and be completely spontaneous, then you will see that at some point he will use dominance and submissive behavior to communicate. Again, it's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. So it's communication. It's part of nature. It's something completely normal. And it's information for us to understand dog behavior and be able to provide better environments in order for conflicts to be less likely, and in order to provide the best welfare we can to our dogs. And in the pictures you can see, thank you so much Daniele and Alexa for the pictures. In the pictures you can see that the dog on the left arrives with the high posture and the right tails, and the tail is also wagging, and he used a nose nudge, and he intends to ride up the other dog. So you can see that the dog on the left is displacing the dog on the right. He's controlling the space the other dog is using, and this interaction is not necessarily about aggression. It's only a way of communicating, and you can establish a ranking in the interaction, and you can also say that the dogs are using the dominance and submissive behavior to communicate, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's just part of normal communication in dogs. And if we don't understand this kind of normal communication, then we will lose information that would allow us to predict and explain a lot of phenomena in our dog's behavior and emotion and intentions. So if we are able to talk about dominance in these terms, like a natural phenomenon, then we will able to uh, help our dogs during interactions. If there is another dog that is pushing him too much, for example, I remember an example in a Facebook group that there was an owner that shared a video of her dog that it was the last time her dog was able to encounter other dogs because she was very reactive. And what the owners saw about the video was that her dog was playing with the other dogs. But when you know about dominance and you know that it can be very subtle, and it can be a way of communicating that is not necessarily showing teeth or growling or any kind of too explicit aggressive behavior, but you can see the other dogs were displacing her and trying to get into her familiar space, and she was trying to get rid of them, and she couldn't because they were in a closed space. They were at a dog park, and it was very difficult for her to interact. Then you can see why she became aggressive. Maybe she was a frail dog that was put in the wrong environment, and it didn't make her well, so she became aggressive. And maybe if the owner and or other professional that would help her would see these interactions and would be able to see dominance in this interaction, maybe they could have helped her in a better way to encounter other dogs and feel safe. So that's what I mean when I mean we can use dominance to provide welfare to dogs. And what I hope I can communicate with these dogs are these takeaway messages. So dominance is a widespread phenomenon in nature, and I invite you to visit the post that I made in my event in the group. Dominance is also a very complex phenomenon, like I said, is related to communication, sometimes to leadership. So dominance and leadership are not the same thing. You can be a dominant and not be a leader, or you can be a leader and not be a dominant individual or a high-ranking individual. It depends on many factors that maybe we can see later in the talk. But dominant individuals could be successful leaders if they know how to create bonds of affiliation with other individuals in the population, and also to reconcile with the others. And dominant individuals, when they have these sets of social skills, then they are able to be successful leaders also. So dominance is not necessarily linked to aggressive behavior. It is a very complex phenomenon that we have to study beyond aggressiveness. Dominance is also not what traditional trainers tell us is. So I'm not going to tell you about using any kind of physical force in your dog, because it makes no sense, even if we talk about dominant theory. And also what I want to share with you is that learning about dominance would help us to provide a better welfare to our dogs. I wanted to start talking about the history of the term and where it came from, because many of us think that the term comes from wolves, from the study of wolves, and that is not true. The hierarchies were first studied by Skjelderup Ebbe. He was from Norway, and he was a child when we started observing chickens. So he first observed hierarchies in chickens. And this contributes to the idea that dominance is a widespread phenomenon in nature. You can see it in any social species. So he observed chickens for 4 years, and by the age of 10, he had a note in a notebook where he had the names of the chickens, and he was able to tell the rank of every chicken. And he would observe that high-ranking individuals were able to access to better resources in the barn, and that submissive individual would show fear and would stay away from the social interactions in order to avoid aggression. They were in captivity, so this kind of behaviors are more intense in captivity. But what he observed was that when two chickens didn't know each other, they would peg each other in order to compete for resources, for water, for mating opportunities, for food, better places to rest. And when these chickens would contest in this way for a few times, then you would see that one individual would be the one who always loses these encounters, and the other one will tend to lose. And when they lose, then they become low-ranking individuals, and when they win, then they become high-ranking individuals. And he named this interaction pecking order, because they would peck each other. And this was the first way in which hierarchies were described. And science used the term pecking order for a long time after Skjelderup Ebbe, until Walter Clyde Alley, the one of the examples with the babies. He was the one who named it dominant and developed the term in science, in social science. And after that, science continued to use dominance, but it would use the term in a very diverse way. Every author would propose a way to use the term dominance. So Carlos Drews in 1993 wrote this paper, this a beautiful paper. It analyzes 13 definitions of dominance, and it's very dense, but I recommend anyone interested in the subject to read it. It's a very good paper. He named the concept and definition of dominance in animal behavior, and he gets to the conclusion that if we want dominance to help us to predict and explain phenomena in animal behavior, then we should define it as you see in the slide. So for him, dominant is an attribute of the pattern of a repeated agonistic interaction between two individuals, characterized by a consistent outcome in favor of the same dyad member and default yielding response, sorry, of its opponent rather than escalation. The status of the consistent winner is dominant and the other of the loser is subordinate. So you can see that it's very similar of what Schelde-Hebbe proposed, and this is what we call agonistic dominance. It's not the only concept of dominance that there is, but it's the most popular. So if you take a book about animal behavior, a textbook about animal behavior, and it talks about hierarchies, it will probably refer to agonistic dominance. That is a concept that talks about how animals became dominant or submissive interacting during a context. And in this concept, you will see that you can name an animal dominant or subordinate when you're talking about the relationship. So you analyze the relationship of a diet, and you can see that one of the members is most likely to not competing about resources. That he will yield the resource quickly, and you will see that he will avoid the conflict in order to avoid also aggression from the other individual. So you can see that one individual is dominant and the other one is subordinate. And you can also make a hierarchy if you're talking about a group. So you would analyze the behavior of every diet in the group. And after you analyze all these behaviors, then you can make a hierarchy. Even you can use mathematical index to build the hierarchies and see what kind of hierarchy is working in the group. So stable hierarchies may be, for example, linear hierarchies like the one you have in the left, and the other one is a pyramidal hierarchy, where you have high-ranking individuals and a lot of submissive individuals that are immediately below him. And you can see that high-ranking individuals can also be named alpha. So here you have your terrifying alpha male from the dog training world. That is not the same. Or now we're going to see why it's not the same that what dog training proposes. But it is true that you can name it with Greek letters. So a high-ranking individuals would be the alpha, and then you have beta, gamma, and you can name it depending on the social status. You can name it with Greek letters, also. But why is it not the same that the dog training proposes? Well, first you have to put behavior in a context. So if you put, for example, animals in captivity, the competition will be higher, and you can see that maybe these hierarchies will be more rigid and more linked to aggression. Sorry, but if you put it in nature, what will happen often is that submissive individuals would have the opportunity to avoid conflict, and these hierarchies maybe are not so fixed and not so pronounced. But what happened with dogs is that in the first place, we should be able to provide resources for them and not to compete over these resources. For example, is that if I don't have enough water, food, and space to bring a dog home, I don't bring a dog home. It makes no sense. It is my responsibility to provide all these resources. So what traditional trainers propose is that you compete with the dog, but you are actually not competing for food. You're not competing for water. Maybe you could compete for spaces if you don't want your dog to accompany you in the couch, but it's also absurd for me. I love my dogs to get on the couch or on the bed and stay with me, because sharing common spaces is a very nice way to create nice relationships, affiliative relationships with my dogs, and I see that as a very nice behavior. Um, and also, the other difference, and this is a very important difference, is that when you're dominant, you have no control over the behavior of the other organism. So you control the resources, but you have, sorry, someone is I'm not sure I am broadcasting correctly, so I will check. Um, so you control the resources that you are competing for, but you do not control the behavior of the other organism. So it makes no sense to say that when I am a dominant, my dog will obey me. It makes no sense. Dominance is not about controlling the behavior of the other, it's about controlling resources. And we already seen that we have no need to control, to have this huge amount of control over resources, and we don't need to use aggression to achieve that kind of control, because we should provide for the resources and not compete for them. So in this sense, even agonistic dominance, that it is the most similar concept that traditional trainers use to what science proposes, I mean, even this concept makes no sense to apply it in the way they propose. So you can see why dominance in nature is not the same that dominance as traditional trainers use it. But there are other concepts of dominance, and still, even if Carlos Cruz made this nice analysis, there are other authors that propose that dominance can be used in other ways. For example, there are authors that think that dominance is lack of aggression. So dominance refers to the peaceful nature of encounters between animals in which escalated fights do not take place, and conflicts are resolved using non-agonistic assessment or submissive behavior. So I am intending to compete for this resource. I am a weak individual, and I see this huge, strong, very powerful individual arrive, and I yield the resource. I don't compete for it. That is why dominance for this author is lack of aggression. So in this concept, you don't see a lot of fights over a resource. You can see that an individual, a submissive individual, yields the resource, and it's the dominant individuals who acquire the resource. In this concept also, it is important to talk about control of resources and a minimum energy expenditure, because if you fight, you're spending energy and you're putting yourself at risk. And animals use the displays to control the behavior of the receiver. So if I yield, I suppose that you should stop the aggressive behavior and acquire the resource, and the contest is over, no? And this is what I was saying. So typically an individual recognizes a feature in the opponent which indicates superiority, like in size, weaponry, quality of the display, because sometimes they use aggressive display that is not intended to harm physically the other individual, but it is aggression. And you submit without a fight. And in this definition of dominance, status is assigned after a single context. So you don't need to see several encounters for knowing when an individual is dominant in this concept. And that we will call it the risk assessment. So a submissive animal makes a risk assessment, and he determined that it's not worth to fight for this resource, and he yields. And that is what happens in this concept that we will see later how to apply it. And also, I wanted to suggest you to read Franz de Waals. This is the third definition of dominance that we're going to talk about. And this definition for me changed a lot of things in the way I saw the term, because Franz de Waals proposed that we shouldn't focus in the agonistic or contest interaction in dominance. That is about acquiring a resource. But for him, dominance is not about acquiring a resource. It is about communication. So you can see that for him, what is important is the exchange of communication signals between dominant and subordinates, and not the outcome of agonistic or competitive encounters. And if you see a talk that I led in the group, then you will see that he talks about an example of a female that was a low-ranking individual that arrived to the high-ranking male in the group, and he was a dominant individual in that relationship, but still she arrives and asks for some leaf that he was eating. But she asks nicely. She asks showing submissive behavior, and she shows affiliation towards the male, and she ends up eating the leaves. So it's not about who is eating the leaves. It's about how I use communication in order to acquire that resource. And the male was still dominant in that example, and she was still submissive. But when you see communication, you can see that she used submission to acquire the leaf. So to know what kind of behavior the animal is showing is very important in this kind of concept. And according to Franz de Waal, the exchange of communication is more stable over time and more predictable. than aggression, and this is very interesting, and it is also a difference of what traditional trainers propose, because we usually see that dominance for traditional trainers and for some scientists is about aggression. And what you can see when you think like Franz de Waal is that you can measure aggression in a population and you cannot establish a hierarchy because it is not rigid. So aggression interactions do not always happen in the same way. But when you measure communication and you can measure, for example, how are the submissive behavior showing in the population, you can see that there is a stable ranking that is not linked to aggression. It is linked to which individuals show submissive behaviors and when. You can measure it in the diets and you can give an order to it. And that is what he calls formal dominance. And you can apply this concept to dogs. So dominance is not about who fights who, it's about how every individual communicates to the other. For Franz de Waal, formal dominance is an unequivocal communication of status. So expressing submission for him is a way to acceptance of the inferior social status. And for him, social organizations can be viewed as two layers, consisting of two layers: a stable formal layer that would be predictable and would be more informative than the one of aggression, and a flexible layer of real dominance that would be agonistic dominance. Uh, so how do we use all this information? Why do we know about dominance? Well, for scientists and for us dog trainers, dominant may help us to predict the social activity of an individual. For example, dominant individuals tend to be more active socially. They tend to be um, they have more freedom of movement. They acquire better resources. So you can talk about behavior in general, not only social activity. They acquire better resources. They have more opportunity to mate. They have more opportunity to reproduce, and in some species they are more successful also breeding the offspring. So you can also predict health. Dominant individuals are usually healthier in the populations. You can also predict physiology, and this is very interesting because submissive individuals in stable hierarchies tend to have higher stress hormones in the bloodstream, and this will help you to predict other uh, things like health as well. So dominance is useful for science because it helps you to explain and predict many phenomena. And it could help you also explain population changes. For example, in this experiment where Snyder uses mice, he built a huge place where he put two mice, and he provided food and water so they would create a population. And the breeders became the dominant animals in the population, so the way they were high-ranking animals. And in the pictures, you can see how submissive individuals in the population would hide from high-ranking animals, sometimes by crowding in the borders of the cage, in the edge of the cage, sometimes lingering in the surface, in the vertical surface, so they could be alone and away from aggression, and they would only feed and drink water when dominant animals were sleeping. So you can predict behavior, and you can predict also that they wouldn't be able to reproduce because they were so stressed that they couldn't use energy for reproduce. So you could see that population would change. So when it was a very large number of individuals in the population, social stress will be so high that birth rate would decrease. So the population would shrink again, and once it was smaller, then submissive animals would be able to acquire more resources and would be healthier and would be able to reproduce. So population would grow again. And in this case, you can see that dominance is useful to predict and explain phenomena at a population level. But then we can see that this is the most impressive example that I can bring to this conference. Everyone that have talked to me in the last few days after I discovered this happened will know about these examples because I tell it to everyone. For me, it's impressive. Dominance also have a biological value. And what you see in the slide is a spotted hyena. And spotted hyena has have an structure that is called pseudopenis. That is this structure that you can see here, and that's the clitoris that is larger than in other mammal species, and they have to give birth through that structure. So the pup will go out from the pseudopenis, and it will tear off all the of the structure. So reproduction, this structure, it has a very high cost to reproduction. They could die, the pain, I imagine, is very high in this moment, and it also makes physical damage. So why in the hyenas it is useful somehow? Why did this structure was successful in the population if it brings so much cost to reproduction? Here you can see the structure in a male and in a female. So this is a penis, and this is a pseudopenis, sorry. So they are slightly different. Researchers say is that there are several hypotheses, but this is one of them. So they say that since spotted hyenas are the female are dominant and the males are submissive, they could have at some point in the species created a system of communication in which a male would display his penis in order to display submission. And in this way, he wouldn't be threatened or killed by the other hyena because he wasn't a threat. He wasn't competing for social rank. But females do compete for social rank. So one way in which females could tolerate better among each other is showing a similar display of submission. So maybe in the population there were some females that has this pseudopenis adaptation, and they started to be more successful and be able to tolerate group living better because they were able to display submission in a more effective way, and they were not attacked by dominant individuals. So dominance is that important to a species. It's so important that species can change its morphology in order to signal social rank in an effective way so they can prevent conflict and have a better quality of life, decrease aggression in the population and have a better quality of life. I hope if you have any doubts after this, please comment. Every comment I see, I will respond. For me, that was an impressive example. So in wolf, dominance was first studied in captivity, and that's why you see there is a rigid competition, fierce competition over power all the time, because this is not a natural group. They were not able to run away from conflict. They were not able to split the pack or to travel for large territory. They was in a closed space, and the competition was very hard because of that. So what Schenkel saw in 1947 was agonistic dominance, and he saw it in a way that animals would compete over power all the time because of the captivity conditions. He says that a lot in the article. He knows that this is not natural behavior. It is a behavior that is imposed to the animal conditions. So after that, David Meck published a book in 1970, and he talked about dominance in the way Schenkel did because they didn't have much more information yet about it because studying wolves in nature is really hard. And you need a lot of resources. So he talks about dominance and he says that wolves has this alpha male and the alpha female, and this is where the term popularized and was start being used in the dog training community. But after that, David Meck keeps studying dogs, and he made several publications that I recommend you to read. They are wonderful. There is also a book of from 2003 that is very nice. He described the social organization and the social ecology of wolves in a very beautiful way. And what David Meck says in 1999 is that in a natural setting, dominance hierarchies in wolves are not a constant fight over power like Schenkel saw, because you're in nature. You can run away from conflicts, you're able to find more resources, you have more space to interact correctly according to the species. And what he says is that dominants respond to a natural base order where breeders are at the top and offspring or non-breeders are subordinate. You can see that he never says that dominance doesn't exist. He says they are not linked to aggression. So for him, this kind of hierarchy is so automatic that animals seldom contest. So they don't use aggression to acquire social status. Social status comes with breeding and with the way the social group is formed. But in dogs, I found, I'm hurrying because I think I'm getting out of time. In dogs, I found that this concept is used in several ways, not in an only way, because we tend to see dogs as they are a domestic species that is very close to us, and we have this huge social interaction with them, social relationships with them, unlike other species. We see that science treats dominance in three main ways. I will talk about two of them now. First, they tell you that is a useful or not useful personality characteristic in dogs. So they make this temperament test, and they say that some individuals are dominant and others are submissive. And if they are dominant, then they are not good dogs. And you can see that it's very different from what science tells us before this, because science tends to see dominant as a relationship characteristic and not a characteristic of one individual. And in dogs, you can see that Campbell and other authors in veterinary ethology treat dominance as a characteristic of a personality. And I wouldn't recommend to see it that way. I will explain why later. And also you can see that there are other authors that treat dominance as a feature of a relationship, but they talk about dominance as something we don't want in the behavior of the dog, because for them, dominance is always linked to aggression. So they say that aggression due to dominance is an unwanted behavior, and we should get rid of it somehow. No, that is more or less what they propose. It's dangerous to be a dominant dog and to have a dominant dogs and all that. And I don't think we should see it this way either, because it doesn't allow you to see the natural behavior of dog. You're putting a huge weight of on the term when you classify it as useful or not useful, or you says is wanted or not wanted. You cannot see the real information that you can have from that term when you use it in this way. So what I propose, what I would like to what I think is better for dogs is to study dominance as a characteristic of a social group, but not putting this weight of telling if it's good or bad for us, because that's not what dominance is. Dominance is simply information, is communication, and you can use it to predict and to explain phenomena. It is not necessarily a bad thing is not necessarily linked to aggression. In dogs, it is very difficult to study hierarchies because they don't always live in groups. They may live in a solitary individuals that may live in small groups that break apart sometimes in the year, so they are not stable packs, but they can also live in packs. And when they live in packs, you can study dominance in dogs. And what I would like you to take away from these kinds of studies in dogs is that I think we should see the dog for who they are and not putting the weight of our expectation on them. So you can use this information to know who they are and to provide a better environment to our dogs in order to provide a better welfare. So you can see that this kind of literature is luckily very popular. and there are several authors working on this kind of approach to study dominance, and they have studied packs in Italy, in India, and also in other places of the world. In the video, in the video link after. So this is a very nice way for me to study dominance in dogs, because you can see the biology of the species and you can take away the information you want without saying that is a bad thing or that you should get rid of it. You simply use it as information, and you know that if your dog, for example, competes over space at home, you can arrange the space in a way that it will decrease the possibility of conflict, and you will also will able to see dominant behavior as a trainer. So if you want to study dominance behavior and to know how this category, which kind of behaviors are in this category, I suggest you to visit the ethogram made by the Gentle team of imposing behaviors of the dogs. It gives you a list with the description of behavior already categorized as imposing behaviors, and you will be able to use this in the field in order to see what dogs are communicating, and that will help you to be there for your dog when he's being when he needs help during an interaction. They're very subtle behaviors, so you have to learn how to see it. It's not that you can see it without studying it. It's very hard to see it. Sometimes they are confused with play. Sometimes you think the two dogs are playing because they are not biting each other, but in the real, for them, this kind of communication may not be play, maybe dominant submissive behavior showing off, and you can, if you can see it, then you can know what's happening, you can predict what's going to happen, and maybe you can help your dog or the other dog if they need it. And this is the way in which dominance can contribute to provide dogs welfare. So if we know about dominance in this way that I'm proposing, then we will able to understand better the social interactions of our dogs. We will able to understand better our dog's behavior, his motivations, intentions, emotions, and we will able to provide a better management of the environment, knowing our dogs, in order to reduce the possibility of conflict even at home. I hope you liked the talk. I'm so sorry for my broken English. This is the first time that I do a talk in English. I hope you can forgive me. And I thank you so much for being here again. This is my dogs and me, Mango Troy. So we thank you, and I think I'll finish the broadcast now. If you have any question, any comment, please leave it in the link.